Captain Vrixtall adjusted his pristine ceremonial armor for the third time in 10 minutes, the polished plates catching the artificial light of Nexus Station's diplomatic quarter. His mandibles clicked in barely contained irritation as he watched the endless stream of lesser beings shuffle through the security checkpoint ahead of him, humans mostly. How utterly predictable. This is what passes for galactic diplomacy these days, he muttered to his aide, Sub-Commander Crix-9, whose 4 eyes rolled in synchronized annoyance. Look at them, Crix, crawling around like insects in their pathetic little civilian clothes. The checkpoint buzzed with activity as various species presented their credentials to the automated scanners. Vrixtall's attention was drawn to a particularly unremarkable specimen, a human female, maybe 40 standard years old, wearing what appeared to be, was that a jumpsuit? The fabric was clean but obviously mass-produced, the kind of utilitarian garbage that screamed working class. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she carried herself with the confident but unpretentious manner of someone who actually worked for a living. Sir, Crix-9 whispered, his translator crackling slightly. Perhaps we should focus on our own clearance. The Emperor's Council expects us within the hour. But Vrixtall was already moving forward, his 6-foot frame cutting through the crowd with practiced arrogance. The human woman had just approached the security desk, reaching into her pocket to retrieve what looked like, oh, this was rich, a civilian badge. Not even a proper diplomatic credential or military identification, just a simple plastic civilian worker's badge with some kind of barcode and her photograph. Vrixtall's mandibles spread wide in what passed for a grin among his species. This was too good to pass up. Excuse me, he called out, his voice carrying that particular tone of condescension that had served him so well throughout his military career. The human turned, raising an eyebrow with mild curiosity rather than the immediate deference he expected. Yes, she replied, her voice steady and unimpressed. That only made it better. I couldn't help but notice your identification, Vrixtall continued, gesturing dismissively at the badge in her hand. A civilian pass? Really? I have to ask, what exactly do you plan to accomplish at a diplomatic summit with that little piece of plastic? The woman looked down at her badge, then back up at him with what appeared to be genuine amusement. Well, I was hoping it would get me through security so I can do my job. Crazy idea, I know. Several other beings in line had started to notice the exchange. Vrixtall felt the familiar rush of an audience, the intoxicating feeling of being the center of attention. His mandibles clicked with satisfaction. Your job? He let out a series of harsh barks that served as laughter for his species. Let me guess. Maintenance? Food service? Oh wait, don't tell me.
You're someone's assistant, aren't you?
Here to fetch coffee for the real negotiators? Crix-9 tugged at his superior's arm, but Vrixtall shrugged him off. This was too entertaining. The human's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Not anger, exactly. More like pity, something like that, she said with a small smile that didn't quite reach those eyes. I thought so. Vrixtall turned to address the growing crowd of onlookers, his voice rising with theatrical flair. This, my fellow beings, is exactly what's wrong with human involvement in galactic affairs. They send their janitors and coffee fetchers to diplomatic summits and expect to be taken seriously. A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd, though Vrixtall noticed that most of the other humans present had gone very quiet. Very quickly. Several were staring at the woman with expressions he couldn't quite read. Respect? Fear? Both? I mean, honestly, he continued, warming to his theme. What's next? Are they going to send their garbage collectors to negotiate trade agreements? Their plumbers to discuss military alliances? The woman stepped closer to the security scanner, but paused to look back at him one more time. You know what, Captain? Vrixtall. Captain Vrixtall of the Hegemony 3rd Fleet. Captain Vrixtall. She rolled the name around like she was tasting something unpleasant. You might want to save some of that energy for the actual negotiations. Something tells me you're going to need it. She placed her badge on the scanner, and immediately every screen in the checkpoint area lit up bright green. Not just green, but that particular shade of administrative approval that meant maximum clearance. The kind of clearance that Vrixtall himself would need to present 3 different forms of identification to achieve. Have a good day, Dr. Martinez. The security AI chirped cheerfully as the barriers retracted. Dr. Martinez, not janitor, not assistant, doctor. But before Vrixtall could process this information fully, a new voice cut through his confusion like a vibroblade through butter. Captain Vrixtal. The voice belonged to Ambassador Thexkolari, the Emperor's personal representative, and, more importantly from Vrixtal's perspective, his direct superior for this mission. The Thexkolari was approaching with his usual complement of royal guards, their crimson armor marking them as elite palace security. Ambassador. Lil Vrixtal snapped to attention, his earlier confidence evaporating like moisture in a vacuum. I was just making a spectacle of yourself in front of half the diplomatic corps? The Thexkolari's voice was quiet, but it carried the kind of authority that made grown warriors reconsider their life choices. Yes, I noticed. The ambassador moved closer, and Vrixtal could smell the expensive oils that marked his high rank. When Thexkolari spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper, but every word hit like a physical blow. Do you know who that was? Vrixtal glanced toward the security checkpoint, where the human woman was already disappearing into the crowd beyond. Some human doctor, apparently. Martinez, the scanner said. Dr. Elena Martinez. The Thexkolari corrected, his mandibles twitching with barely contained rage. Director of the Sol Consortium's External Affairs Division, the person who personally negotiated the mining rights to 3 entire star systems that keep our homeworld's economy functioning. The woman who convinced the Andromedan Trade Union not to embargo our shipping lanes last year, when our military got a little too aggressive with their cargo inspectors. Each revelation hit Vrixtal like a separate punch to his thorax. The crowd around them had grown larger, and he realized with growing horror that many of them were recording the conversation. She's also, the Thexkolari continued with obvious relish, the lead negotiator for humanity's military assistance program. The program that provides the advanced weaponry that makes our Third Fleet something more than an expensive collection of target practice drones. I didn't, Vrixtal stammered. You didn't what? You didn't think? You didn't bother to do basic research on the other attendees? You didn't consider that maybe, just maybe, the humans didn't send their maintenance staff to one of the most important diplomatic conferences of the decade? Crix9 had backed away several steps, clearly hoping to distance himself from the unfolding catastrophe. Smart move, Vrixtal thought dimly. But she was wearing civilian clothes, he protested weakly. She looked so ordinary. The Thexkolari's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. Ordinary.
Yes.
That's rather the point, isn't it? Humans don't need to drape themselves in ceremonial armor and precious metals to feel important. They don't need to announce their significance to everyone in the room because they're secure enough in their actual accomplishments to let their work speak for itself. The ambassador stepped back and addressed his guards. I want a full recording of Captain Vrixtal's performance here transmitted to the War Council within the hour. I'm sure they'll find his diplomatic instincts illuminating. Sir, please, Vrixtal began, while the Thexkolari held up one clawed hand for silence. Oh, we're not done yet, Captain. Not nearly done. You see, Dr. Martinez isn't just attending this conference. She's hosting it. This entire summit exists because she convinced 17 different species that it was worth their time to come here and try to work out a peaceful solution to the Outer Rim disputes. The security checkpoint had gone almost silent now, with everyone within earshot straining to hear the conversation. Vrixtal felt his career prospects withering like vegetation under a dying star. Vrixtal felt his career prospects withering like vegetation under a dying star. More importantly, the ambassador continued. She specifically requested that the hegemony send our best diplomatic personnel, people who could represent our interests with dignity and intelligence, people who wouldn't embarrass our entire species in front of the galactic community. Thexkolari paused, letting that sink in before delivering the final blow. I recommended you personally, Vrixtal. I told the Emperor's Council that despite your personality quirks, you had the intelligence and restraint necessary for sensitive negotiations. I staked my own reputation on your ability to conduct yourself professionally. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Finally, Vrixtal found his voice. What do you want me to do? First, Thexkolari replied. You're going to find Dr. Martinez and apologize. Not a formal diplomatic apology, mind you. A real one, personal, sincere, and public enough that word gets around that the hegemony doesn't actually endorse the public humiliation of allied negotiators. And then you're going to sit in the back corner of every meeting for the next 3 days and keep your mandibles shut unless directly asked to speak. If you so much as twitch in a way that might be interpreted as disrespectful, I will personally ensure that your next assignment involves inspecting waste reclamation facilities in the outer colonies. Vrixtel nodded miserably. Yes, sir. Good. Now move along. The conference begins in 30 minutes, and I need to do some damage control before Dr. Martinez decides that the hegemony isn't worth her time after all. As the crowd began to disperse, Vrixtel caught sight of Crix-9 shaking his head in a mixture of disgust and disbelief. Sir, his aide said quietly.
If I may ask.
How did you not know who she was? Her photograph was in the briefing materials you were supposed to read during the journey here. Vrixtel felt his primary stomach lurch. The briefing materials. The ones he dismissed as boring administrative nonsense and delegated to Crix-9 to summarize. The ones that probably contained detailed biographies of every major participant in the conference. I suppose, he said slowly. I thought I already knew everything I needed to know about humans. And now, sir? Vrixtel looked toward the main conference area, where Dr. Elena Martinez was probably setting up for the most important diplomatic event of the year. The woman he'd just publicly mocked was about to determine the fate of entire star systems, and his own people's economic survival might well depend on her goodwill. Now, he admitted, I'm beginning to suspect I don't know anything at all. The main conference hall of Nexus Station stretched out before Vrixtel like a monument to his own stupidity. Holographic displays showed real-time translations in 47 languages, while delegates from across the galaxy took their assigned seats around the massive circular table. The engineering alone must have cost more than his entire fleet's annual budget. And there, at the head of the table, sat Dr. Elena Martinez in her simple jumpsuit, looking completely at ease while reviewing what appeared to be handwritten notes on actual paper. Paper, as if the most advanced diplomatic facility in known space wasn't good enough for her high-tech requirements. Captain, Crix-9 whispered from beside him. She's looking this way. Indeed she was. Dr. Martinez had glanced up from her notes and was studying Vrixtel with the kind of clinical interest usually reserved for particularly fascinating bacterial samples. When their eyes met, she offered a small wave that somehow managed to be both friendly and terrifying. I should apologize now, Vrixtel muttered, starting to rise from his seat in the back corner where Ambassador Thix-Kolari had banished him. Sir, respectfully, she's about to begin the opening remarks. Crix-9 hissed. Perhaps wait until the break? But Dr. Martinez was already standing, and the hall fell silent with that particular kind of hush that meant important things were about to happen. Good morning, everyone, she began, her voice carrying easily across the space without any apparent amplification. Before we begin today's discussions about the Outer Rim territorial disputes, I'd like to take a moment to address something that happened earlier. Vrixtel felt his blood pressure spike so dramatically, he briefly wondered if his species was capable of having strokes. About an hour ago, in the security checkpoint, I had an interesting conversation with Captain Vrixtel of the Hegemony Third Fleet. She gestured toward his corner with a smile that could have powered a small star. The captain made some assumptions about my role here based on my appearance and credentials, and I think his perspective raises some important points about how we approach these negotiations. Every head in the room turned toward Vrixtel, who suddenly understood what prey animals felt like in their final moments. The Andromedan delegation was recording everything. Of course, the Centauri representatives looked amused. The other human delegates seemed to be fighting back laughter. You see, Dr. Martinez continued. Captain Vrixtel looked at my civilian badge and my work clothes and assumed I must be maintenance staff or someone's assistant. He found it quite amusing that a human janitor might attend a diplomatic summit. Several beings around the table made sounds that Vrixtel's translator couldn't identify, though they didn't sound particularly sympathetic to his position. Now I could be offended by this, Dr. Martinez said, beginning to pace around the table with casual confidence, but instead I find it educational, because Captain Vrixtel's reaction tells us something important about the challenges we face in these negotiations. She stopped walking and faced the assembly directly. How many of you made similar assumptions when you saw me? How many of you looked at the human delegation and wondered why we didn't send anyone who looked more official? An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Vrixtel noticed several delegates suddenly becoming very interested in their note-taking devices. The thing is, Dr. Martinez continued, Captain Vrixtel was absolutely right about one thing. I am in many ways exactly like maintenance staff. You know what maintenance workers do? They fix things that are broken. They identify problems before they become disasters. They work with whatever tools are available, not the tools they wish they had, and they don't waste time arguing about whose fault something is when there's work to be done. She returned to her seat and leaned forward slightly. The Outer Rim disputes exist because 17 different species are making assumptions about each other based on appearance, history, and prejudice rather than actual capabilities and intentions. Sound familiar? The hegemony delegation, seated 2 tables away from Vrixtal, was studiously avoiding eye contact with their own representatives. Ambassador Thix Kolari's mandibles were clenched so tightly they might have been welded shut. "So here's what we're going to do, Doctor," Martinez announced. "For the next 3 days we're going to operate under maintenance worker rules. No ceremonial uniforms, no titles during discussions, no assumptions about anyone's capabilities based on their species, their appearance, or their previous diplomatic history." She pulled out what appeared to be a simple name tag and stuck it to her jumpsuit. It read, "Elena Problem Solver." Everyone gets a name tag. Everyone gets treated like they're here to fix something instead of score political points. And if anyone has a problem with that approach, they're welcome to explain to their home governments why they walked away from a solution because they didn't like the dress code. The Andromedan Prime Minister actually started clapping, which set off a chain reaction around the table. Within moments, nearly everyone was applauding, and delegates were digging through their briefcases for whatever materials they could use to make improvised name tags. Vrixtal watched in horrified fascination as some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy began scribbling their names on pieces of paper and sticking them to their robes, armor, and diplomatic regalia. The Centauri Defense Minister's tag read Marcus Logistics. The hegemony trade representative had written Kex Vel Numbers Person. Captain Vrixtal, Dr. Martinez called out, her voice cutting through the organizational chatter. "Would you like to join us up here? I believe you have some insights about military logistics that might be relevant to our resource allocation discussions." This was it. This was either his chance at redemption, or the moment his career died in front of half the galaxy's leadership. Vrixtal stood slowly, acutely aware that every recording device in the room was focused on him. "Dr. Martinez," he began, his voice surprisingly steady. "Before I say anything else, I owe you an apology. A real one, not a diplomatic nicety." He walked toward the main table, each step feeling like a small eternity. "I made assumptions about you based on appearance and prejudice, and I was wrong. Completely embarrassingly wrong. More than that, I was rude and unprofessional in a way that reflects poorly on my entire species." When he reached her position, Vrixtal did something that would probably make military historians weep. He removed his ceremonial helmet and set it on the table, exposing his unadorned head to the entire assembly. "I judged you by your clothes and your badge instead of your accomplishments and your character. In my culture, that kind of shallow thinking is considered a sign of mental weakness, and I demonstrated it perfectly." Dr. Martinez studied him for a long moment, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a blank name tag. "What would you like your tag to say?" Vrixtal thought about it seriously. What was he really, when you stripped away all the ceremony and pretense? "A Vrix learning," he said finally. She handed him a pen, and he wrote the words in his own script, then carefully stuck the tag to his armor. "Excellent," Dr. Martinez said. "Now, Vrix, you mentioned earlier that humans shouldn't be trusted with military negotiations because we send our janitors to diplomatic summits. I'd like to hear more about that perspective, because I think it reveals some interesting assumptions about the relationship between appearance and competence." Vrixtal felt sweat beginning to form under his armor. This was either brilliant rehabilitation or sophisticated torture. "Horde. I assumed that beings who looked important would be more competent at important tasks," he admitted. "In hegemony culture, rank and appearance are closely connected. If someone doesn't display their status obviously, we assume they don't have any." "Interesting," Dr. Martinez replied. "And how's that working out for your military effectiveness?" The question hit like a physical blow. Vrixtal's mind raced through the Third Fleet's recent performance records, the resource waste, the communication failures between officers too concerned with ceremony to focus on actual strategy. Not well," he said quietly. "We spend more time on protocol than planning, more resources on appearance than capability." And yet, Dr. Martinez continued, "Your brief specifically mentions that Captain Vrixtal has 15 years of combat logistics experience, and has personally overseen supply operations that kept 3 different fleet groups operational during extended campaigns. That's exactly the kind of practical expertise we need for these resource allocation discussions." She had read his file. Not just glanced at it but actually studied his background and identified his genuine qualifications. The woman he'd mocked for being unprepared had done more homework than he had. "How did you," he began. "Because that's my job," Vrix read.
I read everyone's background files.
"All of them. I know that Commander Kexfell over there has a degree in xenoeconomics and developed the trade protocols that increased interspecies commerce by 30% over the last 5 years. I know that Minister Marcus has been quietly preventing 3 different border conflicts through creative resource sharing agreements that never made the official diplomatic reports." She stood and addressed the room again. "Every person in this room was chosen for these negotiations because they have specific expertise that we need. Not because they look impressive or have fancy titles, but because they can actually solve problems." Dr. Martinez pulled up a holographic display showing the disputed territories in the Outer Rim. "Here's our problem. 17 species are fighting over mining rights, shipping lanes and colonial territories in a region that has enough resources for everyone, if we can just figure out how to share them efficiently. It's a logistics problem, disguised as a political crisis." The display zoomed in on specific contested areas, showing resource deposits, shipping routes and colonial installations. "Captain Vrix, based on your supply operation experience, what do you see when you look at these shipping lane disputes?" Vrix studied the display, his military training automatically analyzing the strategic situation. Gradually, patterns began to emerge that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with practical efficiency. "The conflicts aren't really about territory," he said slowly. "They're about bottlenecks. Everyone's trying to use the same 3 hyperspace junction points because they're the most obvious routes, but there are at least 6 alternative pathways that would actually be more efficient for different types of cargo." "Exactly." Dr. Martinez's enthusiasm was infectious. "And what do you think would happen if we redistributed traffic based on cargo type and destination efficiency rather than traditional territorial claims?" Vrix's mind was racing now, seeing the problem not as a diplomatic puzzle but as a straightforward logistics challenge. Shipping times would decrease by an average of 15%, fuel cost would drop significantly, and the junction point congestion would be eliminated entirely. But, he paused, considering the political implications. "But," Dr. Martinez prompted. "But it would require species to cooperate instead of compete. They'd have to share route information and coordinate scheduling. Some of them have been enemies for generations. And how do you think we could encourage that kind of cooperation?" The answer came to him with startling clarity. "Make it profitable. If everyone benefits economically from coordination, the historical grudges become secondary to practical advantage." The Dr. Martinez grinned. "Now you're thinking like a maintenance worker." Over the next 2 hours, what had begun as Vrix's public humiliation transformed into the most productive brainstorming session he'd ever witnessed. Without the usual diplomatic posturing, delegates began attacking problems with practical solutions rather than political maneuvering. The Gondramadan delegation proposed a resource-sharing database that would eliminate duplicate mining operations. The Centauri representative suggested a neutral shipping coordination center that could optimize routes in real time. Even the typically territorial hegemony trade officials started discussing joint infrastructure projects that would benefit everyone. "This is remarkable," whispered Commander Kexfell during a brief break. "We've accomplished more in 2 hours than most diplomatic conferences manage in 2 weeks." Vrix nodded, still somewhat stunned by the transformation. "She planned this, didn't she? The whole thing, my incident, at the security checkpoint. She used it brilliantly," Kexfell agreed. "She turned your prejudice into a teaching moment that got everyone thinking differently about the entire negotiation process." When the session resumed, Dr. Martinez announced the preliminary framework they'd developed, a cooperative resource management system that would increase efficiency, reduce conflicts and provide economic benefits to all participating species. "We'll spend tomorrow working out the technical details and the day after that handling implementation logistics," she said. "But I want to address one more thing before we adjourn." She looked directly at Vrix. "Captain, you mentioned earlier that humans shouldn't be trusted with important negotiations because we send our janitors to diplomatic summits. I want to make sure I understand your position correctly." "Here it comes," Vrix thought. "The final humiliation." "Actually," Dr. Martinez continued, "I think you were absolutely right. We did send a janitor, someone whose job is to clean up messes, fix broken systems and make everything work better than it did before. She gestured around the room at the productive chaos of species working together on practical solutions. The question is, what kind of problems do you want your diplomats to solve? Do you want them to create beautiful ceremonies that preserve traditional conflicts, or do you want them to fix the underlying issues so everyone can move forward? The silence that followed was thoughtful rather than uncomfortable. Tomorrow morning, Dr. Martinez announced, we'll continue working on our maintenance project. Same dress code, same practical focus, same assumption that everyone here is capable of contributing something valuable regardless of what they look like or where they come from. As delegates began filing out of the conference hall, Vrixtal remained seated, processing everything that had happened. Dr. Martinez approached his table, carrying her simple paper notes. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what? Making a fool of myself and nearly derailing the entire conference? For being honest about your assumptions. It gave me the perfect opening to address the same assumptions that were going to undermine these negotiations anyway. Better to deal with them directly than pretend they don't exist." She sat down across from him. "Besides, your logistics analysis was exactly what we needed. Half the conflicts in the Outer Rim exist because nobody's been thinking about the practical infrastructure requirements." "I still behaved unprofessionally," Vrixtal insisted. "Yes, you did, and then you apologized sincerely, admitted your mistakes publicly, and contributed valuable expertise to solve actual problems. That's called growth, Captain. It's something we're all capable of if we're willing to look past our own preconceptions." Dr. Martinez stood to leave, then paused. "One more thing, Vrix. That jumpsuit you were mocking? It's designed by human engineers specifically for zero-gravity maintenance work. It has built-in tool storage, emergency life support systems, and fabric that can seal micro-punctures automatically. It costs more than most ceremonial armor, and it's designed to keep the wearer alive and functional in hostile environments." She smiled that terrifying smile again. Sometimes the most practical choice looks deceptively simple. Good lesson for diplomacy, don't you think? As she walked away, Vrixtal looked down at his name tag, Vrix Learning. Perhaps, he thought, it was time to start taking that seriously. Outside the conference hall, Ambassador Thix Kolari was waiting with what appeared to be genuine satisfaction on his features. "Well done, Captain. I think you might have a future in diplomatic work after all." "Really?" "Really. Dr. Martinez specifically requested that you be assigned as the Hegemony's permanent liaison for the Outer Rim Resource Management Program. Apparently, she believes your combination of military logistics expertise and recent education in diplomatic humility makes you ideally suited for the position." Vrixtal stared at the ambassador, then back at the conference hall where the most effective diplomat he'd ever encountered had just turned his greatest professional embarrassment into an opportunity for genuine advancement. "Sir," he said slowly, "I'm beginning to think humans might be a lot more dangerous than we originally assumed." "Captain," the Hex Kolari replied with a mandible click that indicated amusement, "you have no idea.